After I graduated from college, I realized history and literature majors are not exactly a hot commodity. So I hated applying for jobs, but I had heard of this thing called networking. For those of you who don't know, networking is when you talk to people who already have jobs so that they give you a job later. So when at a party, my soccer teammate Jeff, who was in his mid-30s and worked for the government, leaned over his beer and said, "You know, I have a lot of Hill contacts. Why don't you send me your resume?" I sent it to him immediately, and he wrote back saying it looked great and we should discuss it over drinks, and I was like, oh my God, it's happening. He'll get me a communications job, I'll become a speechwriter for a visionary politician, I'll write about the great ideas of our time, I will be Deputy White House Communications Director Sam Seaborn. So the next week, we met up in Georgetown for drinks, and a couple of minutes in, Jeff leans over his martini and he says, "Parlez-vous le français?" And the first thing I think is, he's noticed the additional skills section of my resume. And the second thing I think is, I definitely exaggerated my French fluency. But I can't tell him that, so instead I say, "Oui?" For those of you who don't have conversant in French on your resumes, "oui" means yes. And then Jeff says a lot of things that I don't understand at all. And I'm smiling and nodding enthusiastically so he doesn't figure it out. At one point, I think he says something about my dress, but I only took one semester of introductory French, so I'm not sure. And we're networking, and that seems unprofessional, so I figure I must have misheard. After a while, we finish our drinks, and he suggests we grab a bite to eat at a French cafe nearby. And I think, great, another chance to show off my ability to smile and nod in a second language. And when the check arrives, he waves off my offer to split it, which at first I think is weird. But then I think, well, maybe he can write it off as a business expense, which would mean I'm being recruited. What? When I get home, I sit my roommates down and I'm like, guys, don't be upset, but we may not be living together for very much longer. I just had this super successful networking sesh. And when I get the job, I'll be able to afford my own place. Now, the news of my impending move did not upset my parents as much as I thought it would. But denial's the first stage of grief, so I just ignore that and tell them about my bright professional future. And as I'm getting to the part about being Deputy White House Communications Director, my dad interrupts and he's like, "You know that was a date, right?" And I'm like, okay, time to educate my elderly cohabitants about the modern job market. So I speak very slowly and I say, for those of you who don't know, networking is when you talk to people who already have jobs so that they give you a job later. And my dad says, for those of you who don't know, getting coffee is networking, drinks and dinner is a date. So I summon every ounce of eloquence I have as future Deputy White House Communications Director, and I say, nuh-uh. And my dad goes, yeah-huh. Did he ask you out again? And then the pieces start falling into place. And I'm like, well, I didn't know that's what he was doing. I thought it was like a second round interview. And he's a conversational ninja. Like, first he asked me if I like sushi. Everyone likes sushi. And then he asked me if I was busy. I'm unemployed. I'm never busy. And then he said, well, since you're not busy and you like sushi, we should get dinner next week. So I couldn't say no. You have to help me get out of this. So the next week, Jeff and I met up for sushi. Partly because confronting him seemed awkward, and partly because I wanted to prove my dad wrong, and partly because I still thought there was a chance Jeff might give me a job. So after we finish eating, Jeff leans over his sake and says, do you know what the best wine in the world is? And I'm like, no, I just graduated from college. I don't know anything about wine. And he says, well, it's a Pinotage, which is a blend of grapes found only in South Africa. Would you like to try the best wine in the world someday? And I'm like, yeah, sure, someday. Because come on, who says no to that question? And he says, well, it just so happens I have a bottle in my apartment across the street. Why don't we get out of here? Now, at this point, I knew we probably weren't networking. But Jeff had laid down this conversational Chinese finger trap that I wasn't sure how to get out of without hurting his feelings or being rude. And it was the best wine in the world. So we're sitting on his couch, sipping our Pinotage. And Jeff leans over his glass and says, do you consider yourself a risk taker? I know. So I'm like, yeah, sure. And he says, I don't think you're a risk taker. And I think, well, I did follow you here. And he says, when there's a risk taker and a not risk taker, the risk taker takes the risk. And I think, what kind of noun cluster clusterfuck is a not risk taker? Like, someone may be risk averse, or maybe she's not a risk taker, but she can't be a not risk taker. That is not a phrase. And then he says, do you want me to take a risk right now? I know. And I get where this is going, so I say, no, thank you. And then he says, well, the risk taker takes the risk. And I can't argue with that logic. And as he leans in for the kiss, all I can think is if I had just majored in computer science, none of this would be happening to me. And so I pull away and I say, I'm so sorry if I misled you, but I'm just not looking to get involved with anyone right now. And he says, oh, no, we can keep this casual. I know. It looks like my dad was wrong after all. I wasn't going on dates. I was being groomed for a casual sexual liaison. And with that, I down my wine because no wine left behind. And I bolted. Neither of us got the jobs we were hoping for that evening. But I did get to try the best wine in the world.